At 4:17 a.m. local time, Venezuelan air defense radars lit up. American aircraft had entered national airspace without warning. Within minutes, precision strikes hit selected command and communication sites on the outskirts of Caracas.
The United States just attacked Venezuela's capital, hitting military facilities in the country. President Trump ordered this operation. There were multiple explosions in Caracas starting at around 2 a.m. local time. You can see the video.
Power flickered across parts of the capital. Military frequencies went silent. Confusion spread faster than information. Then came the second phase. U.S. Special Operations Forces, already positioned, moved with practiced speed. The objective was singular: secure the head of state, remove him before the chain of command could regroup. By sunrise, Nicolás Maduro was gone.
It's a long walk to face the wrath of American justice for Nicolás Maduro and his wife Celia. Dressed in matching tan prison uniforms, they're led in handcuffs from a chopper, headed to their first court appearance, surrounded by heavily armed federal agents.
By mid-morning, Washington had its language ready.
All Venezuelan military capacities were rendered powerless as the men and women of our military, working with U.S. law enforcement, successfully captured Maduro in the dead of night. Lights of Caracas were largely turned off due to a certain expertise that we have. It was dark and it was deadly.
This was not an invasion. It was not regime change. It was described as an arrest, a cross-border law enforcement operation enforcing long-standing U.S. indictments related to narcotics, trafficking, and terrorism. Officials emphasized court dates, extradition papers, and legal process. The language was deliberate, clinical, designed to drain the act of its geopolitical weight. But language does not erase reality. For Venezuela and for much of the global south, the event was unmistakable. A sovereign leader removed by foreign force, no United Nations mandate, no regional consensus, no pretense of collective security, just power exercised directly because it could be. The shock was not merely military, it was historical. To understand how the United States arrived at a point where it would carry out such an operation openly, you have to step back, far beyond that January morning. You have to trace a relationship that did not collapse overnight, but decayed slowly, predictably, and almost mechanically over decades. For much of the 20th century, Venezuela was not an adversary to the United States. It was one of Washington's most dependable partners in Latin America, especially after oil reshaped the global order. By the 1920s, American companies like Standard Oil and Gulf had entrenched themselves deep inside Venezuela's energy sector. When Venezuela became a founding member of OPEC in 1960, it did so not as a rebel state, but as a cautious participant, balancing nationalism with cooperation. Through the Cold War, Venezuela occupied a rare position. It was a democracy in a region repeatedly destabilized by coups and military juntas. Its elections were imperfect, its wealth unevenly distributed, but its alignment was clear. Caracas sold oil, Washington provided markets, security assurances, and diplomatic backing. Venezuelan crude fueled American factories, automobiles, and suburban life. In return, Venezuelan elites benefited from access, legitimacy, and stability. The relationship was not warm, but it was orderly. It ran on predictability. Venezuela understood its role as a supplier and regional ally. Washington understood Venezuela as reliable, manageable, and safely within its sphere. each side knew its place. That equilibrium shattered in December 1998 with the election of Hugo Chávez.
Esta moribunda constitución haré cumplir, impulsaré las transformaciones democráticas necesarias para que la República Nueva tenga una carta magna adecuada a los nuevos tiempos. Lo juro.
Chávez was not simply a new president, he was a rupture. A former paratrooper who had led a failed coup in 1992. He came to power carrying the anger of decades of inequality and the memory of a political system that had collapsed under its own corruption. From his first months in office in 1999, he made clear that Venezuela would no longer behave as a junior partner in a US-led hemisphere. He rewrote the constitution. He reasserted state control over the oil industry. He spoke openly about using oil revenues not to appease foreign investors, but to reshape the Venezuelan society. More provocatively, he challenged the unspoken hierarchy of the Americas. He condemned US interventions abroad, opposed the proposed free trade area of the Americas, and sought alliances that bypassed Washington entirely, including closer ties with Cuba, China, Russia, and Iran. His rhetoric was confrontational by design. His symbolism was calculated. Chávez understood that power in the modern world was not only economic or military, but narrative. And his narrative was unmistakable. Venezuela would no longer ask for permission. Washington responded with growing alarm. Tensions escalated rapidly and reached a breaking point in April 2002. Amid protests, elite defections, and military pressure, Chávez was briefly removed from power. A transitional government was announced within hours. While the United States denied direct orchestration of the coup, senior US officials were quick to signal approval of the interim leadership. Diplomatic recognition came before the dust had settled. The coup collapsed just as quickly. Loyalist military units and mass demonstrations restored Chávez to office within 48 hours. But something irreversible had occurred. From Caracas's perspective, the lesson was clear. The United States was not merely hostile to Chávez's policies. It was willing to accept and possibly encourage his removal. From that moment on, trust evaporated. Chávez governed with the assumption that Washington posed an existential threat. Media laws tightened. The military was reshaped around loyalty. Oil revenues were redirected towards social programs and regional alliances designed to insulate Venezuela from US pressure. Every move deepened the divide. When Chávez died in March 2013, some expected the hostility to ease. It did not. Nicolás Maduro inherited a collapsing oil market, structural economic weaknesses, and an already poisoned relationship with Washington.
George W. Bush, you are a donkey, Mr. Bush.
Instead of recalibration, pressure intensified.
Late Tuesday, Chávez's hand-picked successor, interim President Nicolás Maduro, expelled 2 American military attachés from the country, accusing them of trying to destabilize the army.
Sanctions expanded. Diplomatic isolation hardened. By the late 2010s, the United States had abandoned any pretense of neutrality, openly declaring Venezuela's government illegitimate and recognizing an alternative leadership without dislodging the one in power.
The United States proudly recognized National Assembly President Juan Guaido as the interim president of Venezuela.
What had once been a managed partnership had become a prolonged confrontation. And confrontations, once locked in place, rarely resolve themselves peacefully. By 2020, Venezuela had become a symbol. For Washington, it was proof that socialism failed and must be rolled back. For Caracas, It was proof that American power had never accepted true independence in Latin America. In that climate, reckless ideas thrive. This is where decline begins to show itself. Empires at the height do not need to prove power. Their influence is assumed. Their threats rarely need to be carried out, but as confidence erodes, demonstration becomes necessary. Power must be seen to be believed, and once belief fades, force becomes habitual. This is the logic of military overstretch. The United States today maintains hundreds of bases across the world, intervenes across continents, and carries the burden of global enforcement. Each action is justified as necessary. Each operation is framed as limited, but together they form a pattern of compulsion rather than choice. History is crowded with examples. Spain drained its treasury fighting revolts in the Netherlands. Britain stretched itself across too many commitments after the Second World War. The Soviet Union bled in Afghanistan while its economy stagnated at home. None of these empires collapsed because of a single failure. They collapsed because they could no longer stop using force to sustain authority. Venezuela, in this sense, is not the center of the story. It is the mirror. A superpower that once shaped outcomes through diplomacy and economic gravity now flirts with shadowy incursions and symbolic threats. Not because the prize is large, but because retreat feels intolerable. The fear is not losing Venezuela. The fear is losing the habit of command. And this is the oldest trap in imperial history. Once an empire must keep fighting to show it is powerful, it has already begun to lose the kind of power that lasts. As the Roman historian Tacitus observed, they make a desert and call it peace.